Chapter 19 of the book of Genesis is one of the most tragic chapters in all the Bible. It's the famous chapter that tells the events of Sodom and Gomorrah and God's destruction on them. We find in verse 1 that Lot is now in Sodom sitting at the gate. To sit at the gate of a ancient city like this is a sign that you have some authority, some power. You're on the town council or something. So Lot has had worked himself into a position of power and authority in Sodom, of all places. And then these two angels that the Lord sent the day earlier, had come to town. And in that evening, they come to town, and Lot invites them into his home. He's going to give them hospitality as part of the culture of that time. He wants to get them out of the town square, knowing I'm sure that a lot of people in that town are very, very wicked, and they could harm them. So he takes them into his home. But the men of the town found out there was new flesh in town, and so they come to take advantage of these men. They're going to have homosexual relationships with these men, homosexual rape. It's an awful, awful scene that we see here. And they say in verse 5, bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. Such a tragic thing. So we see the depravity of humanity right here. And by the way, we see another evidence of depravity at the end of the chapter. I'm not even going to read that account. It's so awful. But we find it in verses 30 on down that Lot's daughters commit immoral acts with him in order to have children. Is a despicable, ugly, ugly scene and a sign of spiritual corruption and depravity of a great magnitude. It's an ugly chapter. But we also see in this chapter that the Lord is holy and He's righteous. He will not forever look the other way at sin. It says in verse 13, these angels said, we have come to this place because there's an outcry so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. The wickedness of these towns were so awful that the Lord's righteous anger had to flare up against them and destroy them. That's why the angels were there. So we see that as well. We see that these angels blind these deplorable men trying to have relationships with them. And then they begin, we see now God's mercy as he begins now to bring Lot out of the land of Sodom, the town of Sodom. So God is now going to bring judgment on these people, just as He planned to do, but He has mercy on Lot. And they say, Lot, we need to get out of here because God is going to destroy this place. I want Lot and his family can go out with him. In verse 12, it says, the two men said to Lot, whom else have you here? A son-in-law and your sons, your daughters, and whoever you have in the city, bring them out to this place, for we're about to destroy this place. But Lot didn't want to go. So verse 16, but he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his two daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. What mercy, what compassion the Lord had to actually drag Lot and his family out of Sodom so they would not be destroyed. Now he could not convince his son-in-laws and so forth and his other married daughters to come with him. They thought he was joking with them. In verse 14, they just thought he was joking around, or they had no concept, apparently, that Lot had any relationship whatsoever with Jehovah God. And so Lot, his wife, and his two daughters are taken out of Sodom before the destruction by the angels. But as we know the famous story here, she looks back, verse 26, Lot's wife looks behind her, and she became a pillar of salt right at that time. So by turning back, she had her heart so set on Sodom that she just turns back, and Abraham, or Sarah's wife, is now turned to salt. And then he and his two daughters go to the little town of Zor, and then eventually to the mountains where awful things will take place. What a sad day it had to be in verse 29. When Abraham gets up the next morning, he looks out and he sees, verse 28 actually, he sees the smoke of the land ascending like the smoke of a furnace. How his heart must have been broken to know that there wasn't enough righteous people in that town for God to spare it. Lot is spared, but what an awful, awful fix What an awful mess he's made of his life. He's a tragic character found in the Scriptures. We want to look at chapter 20 next time. Hope you can join us.